Good evening. A grandmother from Warwickshire claims her daughter's death might have been avoided if social services had allowed her to look after her grandchildren. The woman, who can't be identified, says the two children were eventually adopted instead, which led to her daughter attempting suicide and dying a few weeks later. It follows a report by the British Association of Social Workers calling for a significant rethink of the current adoption laws. Olivia Morley reports.
Her 14th grandchild is due any minute, but there are two she no longer has contact with. We're calling this woman Elizabeth. It's not her real name.
It started off with domestic violence within the family home of my daughter, who lived with a man that was very aggressive, very violent. Domestic violence is something social services come in on and remove children, even though parents, mothers in particular, have distanced themselves from that relationship.
Elizabeth, who was looking after her grandchildren at the time, received a knock on the door by a social worker. The case ended up in court.
I wasn't parted into this hearing, and nobody, not the solicitors, not my daughter's barrister, informed me that I could fill in a form and be parted into this hearing.
In a statement, Coventry City Council said every child who's considered for adoption is extremely vulnerable and deserves the very best care. They admitted Elizabeth had been a kinship carer, but said the court felt that a plan for adoption was in the children's best interests. Elizabeth and the children's paternal family were both assessed by social services to see if they'd be suitable long-term carers. Ultimately, they were put up for adoption, a decision that was the final straw for her daughter.
Her words to me was, "I can't live without my children." It was the one thing she said that gave me life. She says, was my children.
Just weeks later, Elizabeth's daughter died after attempting suicide. The grandchildren were formally adopted. Elizabeth hasn't seen them for over 2 years. A recent inquiry by the Birmingham-based British Association for Social Workers has called for a significant rethink and review of adoption law.
We also found was a widespread worry about the model of adoption. Our model of adoption is that the child gets a new birth certificate, they get a new set of parents, essentially, and very rarely do they have direct contact with their birth families, even their siblings or, say, grandparents.
The Department for Education, which is responsible for the training of social workers, says every decision it makes regarding adoption is done so with the best interests of the child at heart. The government says it's pledging more than £200 billion into local services, including children's ones, by the year 2020. But for some families, the fight goes on. Olivia Morley, BBC Midlands Today, Birmingham.